Welcome back. Christie Keulder, an independent researcher and author of the third Elections Media Monitoring Report, will be presenting this report next week. Now, the report is part of an initiative under the Office of the Media Ombudsman. It evaluates media coverage during elections and highlights its critical role in supporting democracy. We're pleased to have Christie with us this evening to unpack some of these insights. Christie, good evening and welcome to the Daily Roundup.
Good evening and thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for being here. Of course, we are expecting the report to be released next week. It was meant to happen today, but due to certain circumstances, it couldn't. So without divulging too much, of course, on the findings, perhaps you can speak to us to start with about some of the focus areas that were key for the third report.
Yeah. So the project is done, as you said, under the Office of the Media Ombudsman. Its purpose is to track how media covers elections. And the reason for that is, one, because the media signed a code of conduct that they would cover elections in an unbiased, partial and balanced manner, that all political agencies, whether it's the Electoral Commission or the political parties, would receive coverage that informs the voting public about events, messages, policies, candidates, and so forth.
Right.
So the media has that public role, or that role to inform the public. So we wanted to reflect on both the bias kind of ways, to sort of have that kind of assessment, but also to see what our party's focusing on, what is the media focusing on, and what are the messages that people are getting. So we produce monthly reports. Every month we have a slightly different set of themes, but we have a set of indicators that allow us to track over time, and we'll do this until the end of December to have a proper understanding of how media coverage sort of evolves over time when it comes to elections.
We had the Media Ombudsman with us, of course, to speak on the previous two reports. And from what our conversation unfolded was they were more or less the same. And I don't know if it's because of the time span in between the two reports. And now, obviously, we're closer to the elections more than before. Were there any surprises this time around with the third report?
I think the outstanding things is, one, that there has been a relatively large pickup in media coverage as we get closer to the elections, and we think that will continue to happen. The second important thing is that what we've seen in terms of who gets coverage and where do they get coverage, that the media is relatively balanced. For example, all the newspapers provide coverage for most of the political parties, and they do so in a manner that often, I don't want to say benefit small parties, but small parties get more coverage often than what their size predicts their political importance in the political landscape. And that is often because these parties, the coverage is sort of event-based, or it has to do with crises. Right. So the NEFF, for example, gets a lot of coverage because of the court cases. It doesn't mean to say that they are in the media every day for, say, a period of 30 days. They're just there 1 or 2 days and get a lot of coverage, but it's crisis coverage. So one of the things that we see is that all the political parties, none of them have a systematic, strategic media strategy, a media plan, a systematic way to drive both the volumes of coverage they get, but also the slanting of the coverage. So typically, if you have a day with bad coverage, you would want to have 2 or 3 days with good coverage. Right. But that's an effort, that's a strategy, that's a deliberate action.
That is not currently there.
Yes, that's not there currently, no, unfortunately. And we also see that there's not a lot of selling of the parties. So it's almost as if the political parties have decided that mass media is not their field of interest for generating support, finding new voters. So the poor voting public is losing out, I feel. We've all seen the launch of manifestos, but what we see in the coverage is the manifesto day gets coverage, an event gets coverage, but then there's no follow-up. there's no attempts by the parties to sell that manifesto, the key policies. The same thing with the candidates' lists. So how should we know what parties stand for or what their candidates, who they are and what those candidates are looking to promote when there's no attempt by the parties to sell them?
Right. That's a great point you raised there, Christie. I'll ask, a follow-up question on that a bit later on if something leads back into that. But I want to talk about, how media outlets in Namibia can improve their election coverage.
Yes. So the document that we produce every month not only covers the outcome of the coding of the media content, but it also provides some guidance as to how political parties also can use this data. With regard to the media, it allows media houses, if they follow the outcome of that, they could then sort of identify areas where they need to improve. In other words, should they pay more attention to specific themes? Should they pay attention to specific candidates? We track, amongst other things, say sources. Who are being called on to comment on reports? Are they men? Are they women? So the whole issue of gender journalism, we can strongly point out where that's need to sort of get more, not just journalists, female journalists, but also sort of female sources, develop that kind of thing. So that's a way for them to track what goes through their system.
Right.
And then for the parties, it's a lot of very good information we're giving away for free for political parties, right? They should just use it. But it helps them to identify, to see what is in the media. And as I say, if they don't have a strategy, then it's going to be difficult because then they don't set the agenda for the elections. They don't tell people about their prospects and so forth. It all comes from the media side. And sadly, a lot of these small parties survive on crises. So either leadership disputes or, and there's been a lot of that these last few days.
Yeah, and if they want to change the narrative, they're going to have to come up with a plan for that.
Absolutely.
Definitely. I want to talk also about how important training for journalists are, because you've mentioned some sort of areas where, there is room for improvement. So in particular in relation to election coverage, how important is training?
Well, it's essential. And unfortunately, over the last few years, there's been significant changes in the media landscape. A lot of senior journalists have left the profession. There's a lot of very junior people that runs very important beats. With the seniors gone, there's not enough mentoring, there's not enough guardrails. And that, I think, has had a huge impact. To send a very junior journalist to go and interview a very senior political leader can be very intimidating. And I think it's a little bit unfair. So I think, from that side, there's a lot that can be done. And again, as I say, this is available for free to them. It's up to them to make available and create the platforms on which this kind of training can be. But I think there's a big need for training on election coverage. The media signed a code of conduct, which falls under the Office of the Media Ombudsman. There's training on that to be done. There's also the electoral code of conduct. There are all these kinds of places where journalists play a big part. Right. And I would even argue that there is a need by the ECN to train journalists as election observers. They should be there. They should observe and understand how votes are collated, how they're calculated, how they're tabulated, and so on.
Yeah. Misinformation and disinformation are hot topics globally. How does your report tackle these issues in the context of Namibian elections?
Yeah, I have to make it clear that what we're doing is we're trying to give output to the mandate of the Media Ombudsman. So we track only formal media, right? So we don't monitor what happens on the Facebook page of an activist or a citizen reporter, right? So we track what what the media puts out. We only track what is part of their editorial decisions, right? So we don't, for example, look at the comments in a newspaper's online section. Mis and disinformation is, of course, almost the same thing. One is just the intent to do it deliberately, and others isn't. I think it also relates to things like hate speech. And it's something that requires a bit of a different methodology than the one we're using at the moment. But there's enough that we can, because we get like cuts for radio or access to tweets and so forth, we try and follow it up and identify it if it comes up as something, but it's not a formal part of this project.
All right.
Yeah.
Just finally, Christie, as I mentioned in the beginning, the report is expected to come out next week. So do we have a date set for that now? Yeah,
I think it's Tuesday next week sometime. The office will confirm the exact time, but I think it should be in the morning sometime.
And of course, the reports are available for public consumption as well. So where can they go to have a look at it?
The office of the Media Ombudsman.
Yeah. Fantastic. Christie, thank you so much for your time this evening, and thank you for being here.
Thank you very much.
That was Christie Keulder speaking to us there. We'll be right back after this very brief break, and our conversations here continue.